Hello, and welcome to the Girl Scout Heart of Michigan Juneteenth program series. This is part one of three-part series. This Discover section will explore the history of slavery and freedom, which is at the core of the nation's shared history. We will begin with 15th century Africa and Europe and go through the founding of the United States, then conclude with the nation's transformation during the Civil War and Emancipation.
Were all slaves brought over from Africa? Between 1502 and 1870, about 12 million Africans were taken from their homeland to be slaves in Europe and the Americas. They were also brought in from South America and the Caribbean. As time passed, more and more slaves were born in America. When the United States became a nation in 1783, the majority of slaves had been born here. In 1808, it became illegal to bring in slaves from other countries. When owners wanted more slaves, they purchased them from other American slave owners.
Where did American slaves live? Most lived on farms called plantations that grew crops such as cotton, tobacco, rice, and sugar. Some plantations were small with only a few slaves. Others were very big, with hundreds of slaves. On the bigger plantations, the owner often lived in a fancy house called the big house. Slaves lived in cabins called quarters. A big plantation was like a small village with lots of little houses where special work was done, such as weaving, sewing, and carpentry. Slaves made almost everything that was needed right there. Some lived in towns and big cities. They worked in factories and in people's homes. So now that we know where they lived, let's find out what happened during the Civil War.
When the war began in 1861, many slaves ran away to join the Northern Army. Sometimes families fled together, walking at night to avoid the patrollers. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln gave the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves. The South had declared itself a new country, so it didn't obey this new Northern law. But word spread among the slaves, and even more ran away. Those who made it to the Northern Army camps were paid to dig trenches, build roads, repair equipment, and aid the war effort. In addition, 1,800 men fought as soldiers in all black units. Women nursed the wounded, cooked, and did the laundry. Some, like Harriet Tubman, became spies for the Northern Army. During the 4 years of the war, 500,000 slaves ran away to freedom.
Let me repeat that. On January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect to free the slaves. On January 31st, 1865, Congress ratified the 13th Amendment, which outlawed slavery in the United States. However, the war would continue until April 1865.
Even though slavery was abolished in January of 1863, the African Americans in Texas didn't receive the news or enjoy its enforcement until June of 1865, when Major Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston to deliver the news. Juneteenth, first celebrated in Galveston, Texas, is the oldest known celebration to commemorate the ending of slavery. It is a celebration of family, freedom, and education. As African Americans migrated outside of Texas, the celebration spread to other parts of the United States. Today, Juneteenth is celebrated worldwide with celebrations in places like Nigeria, Japan, Trinidad, Guam, and Taiwan.
We celebrate Juneteenth because it honors those African American ancestors who survived the inhumane institute of bondage, as well as demonstrating pride in the marvelous legacy of resistance and persistence they left us. We celebrate because the terrible time of slavery finally ended in America.
When slavery ended, life as free people began. The first thing many did was look for their family. Many African Americans had been sold away, and now was the time to get them back together. If the family members lived on a nearby plantation, it was easier to find them. Many had been sold several times, which made it harder to track them down. The children may have ended up in Texas, while the father was in Florida and the mother lived in Georgia. One way to search was to put ads in newspapers. Some spent years looking for their families. Their powerful love gave them the strength to keep going. Many were lucky and did find one another again.
With liberty and justice for all. If you're interested in learning more, here are some resources. Juneteenth Jamboree. The story of Juneteenth. All different now. Come Juneteenth.
This patch will be available in September. Please reach out to gshom at gshom.org to pre-order. Girl Scouts discover, connect, and take action. The next video in this series will be Connect with Juneteenth.